today's English audiobook on how to overcome from self-sabotage. Imagine standing before a mountain, vast and immovable, its peak hidden in clouds, its slopes steep, treacherous, and intimidating. And now imagine realizing that this mountain is not outside of you, but inside of you, built not of stone and dirt, but of habits, fears, doubts, and patterns that have quietly sabotaged your own progress for years, maybe decades. What if I told you that this mountain, your very own self-sabotage, is the thing standing between the life you are living right now and the life you most deeply desire, a life of freedom, fulfillment, and clarity? What if the obstacles you face are not punishments from the world, not cruel twists of fate, but signals, loud, flashing signals, that something inside of you is asking to be healed, asking to be transformed, and asking, most of all, to be faced with courage? That is the heart of the mountain is you. This book is not a casual self-help pep talk, nor is it a collection of quick hacks or motivational one-liners meant to be forgotten by tomorrow morning. Instead, it is an excavation, a careful unveiling of the way self-sabotage creeps into our lives, the way we unconsciously build barricades in front of ourselves and then wonder why we cannot move forward, the way we confuse comfort with safety and mistake fear for intuition. Author Brianna Wiest invites you into a journey that is equal parts confronting and compassionate, because she knows, perhaps better than anyone, that the hardest mountain you will ever climb is the one that exists within your own mind. Here's the promise of this book, and it is a big promise. If you are willing to look directly at the ways you hold yourself back, if you are willing to peel apart the protective layers of your habits and coping mechanisms, willing to sit with discomfort long enough to understand that mountain, piece by piece, and discover the freedom that has always been waiting on the other side, you can stop the cycle of sabotaging your own potential, stop chasing goals you do not truly want, and start creating a life that feels aligned, authentic, and genuinely yours. Wiest explains that self-sabotage is not random chaos, laziness, or lack of discipline, but a misguided attempt to protect ourselves from pain. Think about that for a moment. The very thing that is ruining your plans, derailing your progress, and stealing your joy is also the same thing that, deep down, is trying to keep you safe. Your mind has mistaken old wounds for current threats. It has learned that success, love, or visibility might bring judgment, rejection, or loss, and so it pulls you back just when you are about to leap forward. This is why we procrastinate on projects that matter most, why we cling to relationships that hurt us, why we quit right before a breakthrough, why we numb ourselves with distraction or busyness instead of doing the work that would truly set us free. The book promises that once you understand this pattern, once you see self-sabotage not as an enemy, but as a message from a deeper part of yourself, you can finally begin the work of transformation. And transformation, in Wiest's world, is not a dramatic overnight reinvention. Welcome back to today's English audiobook on how to overcome from self-sabotage. Imagine standing before a mountain, vast and immovable, its peak hidden in clouds, its slopes steep, treacherous, and intimidating. And now imagine realizing that this mountain is not outside of you, but inside of you, built not of stone and dirt, but of Welcome back to today's English audiobook on how to overcome from self-sabotage. Imagine standing before a mountain, vast and immovable, its peak hidden in clouds, its slopes steep, treacherous, and intimidating. And now imagine realizing that this mountain is not outside of you, but inside of you, built not of stone and dirt, but of habits, fears, doubts, and patterns that have quietly sabotaged your own progress for years, maybe decades. What if I told you that this mountain, your very own self-sabotage, is the thing standing between the life you are living right now and the life you most deeply desire, a life of freedom, fulfillment, and clarity? What if the obstacles you face are not punishments from the world, not cruel twists of fate, but signals, loud, flashing signals, that something inside of you is asking to be healed, asking to be transformed, and asking, most of all, to be faced with courage. That is the heart of the mountain is you. This book is not a casual self-help pep talk, nor is it a collection of quick hacks or motivational one-liners meant to be forgotten by tomorrow morning. Instead, it is an excavation, a careful unveiling of the way self-sabotage creeps into our lives, the way we unconsciously build barricades in front of ourselves and then wonder why we cannot move forward, the way we confuse comfort with safety and mistake fear for intuition. Author Brianna Wiest invites you into a journey that is equal parts confronting and compassionate, because she knows, perhaps better than anyone, that the hardest mountain you will ever climb is the one that exists within your own mind. Here's the promise of this book, and it is a big promise. If you are willing to look directly at the ways you hold yourself back, if you are willing to peel apart the protective layers of your habits and coping mechanisms, if you are willing to sit with discomfort long enough to understand what it is trying to teach you, then you can dismantle that mountain piece by piece and discover the freedom that has always been waiting on the other side. You can stop the cycle of sabotaging your own potential, stop chasing goals you do not truly want, and start creating a life that feels aligned, authentic, and genuinely yours. Wiest explains that self-sabotage is not random chaos, not simply laziness or lack of discipline, but a misguided attempt to protect ourselves from pain. Think about that for a moment. The very thing that is ruining your plans, derailing your progress, and stealing your joy is also the same thing that, deep down, is trying to keep you safe. Your mind has mistaken old wounds for current threats. It has learned that success, love, or visibility might bring judgment, rejection, or loss, and so it pulls you back just when you are about to leap forward. This is why we procrastinate on projects that matter most, why we cling to relationships that hurt us, why we quit right before a breakthrough, why we numb ourselves with distraction or busyness instead of doing the work that would truly set us free. The book promises that once you understand this pattern, once you see self-sabotage not as an enemy, but as a message from a deeper part of yourself, you can finally begin the work of transformation. And transformation, in Wiest's world, is not a dramatic overnight reinvention, but a steady, patient climbing, step by step, breath by breath, until you realize that the mountain that once seemed impossible to scale has slowly become your path to strength, resilience, and clarity. Listening to this book, you will be guided into questions you may have never dared to ask. What do I really want? Not what I think I should want. Where have I confused comfort with fulfillment? How is my fear of failure secretly a fear of success? And most of all, how can I stop repeating cycles that only lead me back to the same frustrating place? With every chapter, Wiest holds up a mirror, not to shame you, but to awaken you, so you can finally see yourself clearly and understand that the answers you have been searching for are already within you. The mountain is you, but here is the secret. You are also the climber, the guide, and the conqueror. And when you learn to rise above your own sabotage, you will find that what once felt like the heaviest burden has transformed into the very source of your power. That is the journey this book invites you to take, and that is the journey we are about to begin together. Chapter 1. Self-sabotage comes from what's unfamiliar. Close your eyes and imagine this. You are on the edge of change. Perhaps you have set a new goal. Maybe it is a healthier lifestyle, a more aligned career, or a relationship that finally respects you. And just as you begin to step toward it, something inside pulls you back, whispers in your ear that it is too much, too risky, too far from what you have known, and suddenly, without even realizing it, you start to resist the very thing you said you wanted most. This is the essence of self-sabotage, and in this chapter, Brianna Wiest reveals a powerful truth. Self-sabotage is not about weakness, laziness, or lack of ambition. It is about familiarity. It is about the nervous system, the subconscious mind, the deep inner wiring that confuses the unfamiliar with the unsafe. The promise of this chapter, and really, the big promise of the entire book, is that once you understand the roots of your self-sabotage, once you can see that what you are doing is not irrational but protective, you can begin to rewire yourself for growth instead of contraction, for possibility instead of limitation, and for freedom instead of fear. Because the real enemy is not the change itself. The real enemy is the way your body and mind perceive change, as a disruption to homeostasis, as a danger, even when that change is positive, even when it is exactly what you need. Wiest explains that our subconscious does not care about happiness or fulfillment. It only cares about survival, about consistency, about keeping us within the bounds of what feels known, because the known, no matter how painful, is predictable, and what is predictable is what the subconscious equates with safety. That is why a person can stay in a toxic relationship long after they have admitted it hurts them, why someone can sabotage their career advancement even though they claim to want success, why a person can ruin financial stability just as they begin to build it. It is not that they want to fail. It is that stability feels like survival, and the unfamiliar feels like danger. Think of it this way. If you grew up in an environment where love was unpredictable, where affection came with conditions, where stability was rare, then your subconscious recorded that pattern and built an internal definition of normal. Later in life, when you encounter real consistency, genuine love, or lasting stability, it feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar feels unsafe, so you unconsciously pull back. You may pick fights, procrastinate, numb yourself, or create chaos, all strategies to bring you back into the rhythm of what feels known. The tragedy, Wiest notes, is that this cycle keeps us locked in lives we have outgrown, tethered to identities we no longer want, and separated from the very opportunities we crave. But here lies the profound promise. Once you realize that your self-sabotage is not a flaw in your character, but a signal from your subconscious that something unfamiliar is happening, you can begin to change the meaning you assign to unfamiliarity. You can train yourself to see the unknown not as a threat, but as a possibility, not as a danger, but as the gateway to growth. This is not about tricking yourself with false positivity. It is about reconditioning your nervous system, little by little, to feel safe in expansion, to feel comfortable with growth, to recognize that the new is not automatically dangerous. Wiest emphasizes that the key is awareness. When you catch yourself sabotaging, when you notice you are delaying a decision, undermining your own efforts, or creating drama out of thin air, you can pause and ask, what feels unfamiliar right now? What part of me is confusing newness with danger? That single moment of recognition can interrupt the cycle, can give you the space to respond differently, and over time, those small interruptions rewire the system itself. Imagine the power of that. Imagine turning the act of sabotage into a signal that healing is happening, that you are on the brink of growth, that your mountain is showing you exactly where you need to climb. And here is the deeper promise of the book as a whole. If you commit to this process, if you use your moments of sabotage as information rather than condemnation, if you understand that your discomfort is not a stop sign but a doorway, you will find that your life transforms, not in a single dramatic leap, but in steady, undeniable shifts. You will stop running back to what hurts simply because it feels normal. You will stop abandoning yourself at the first sign of discomfort. You will learn to stand firmly in the unfamiliar until it becomes familiar, until the life you once resisted becomes the life you cannot imagine living without. The mountain, then, is not just about obstacles. It is about perception, about learning to see the unfamiliar not as the enemy, but as the path. And Wiest's promise is this: when you make peace with the unknown, when you embrace the unfamiliar, you dissolve the very foundation of your self-sabotage, and in that dissolution, you free yourself to climb higher than you ever thought possible. So, as you listen to this chapter, let it sink in. Self-sabotage comes from what is unfamiliar, but unfamiliarity is not your enemy. It is your opportunity, and the moment you choose to see it that way, you begin dismantling your mountain, one brave step at a time. Chapter 2. You don't change in breakthroughs, you change in micro-shifts. When most of us think about change, we imagine it as a dramatic turning point, a breakthrough moment, a lightning strike of clarity that instantly transforms us, a day when everything falls into place and we never look back. And we often sit around waiting for that one big moment to arrive, believing that if we just reach it, we will finally become the person we want to be. But Brianna Wiest, in this chapter, gently and firmly dismantles that myth by reminding us that real, lasting transformation does not come from single breakthroughs, but from micro-shifts, those small, almost invisible adjustments in thought, choice, and behavior that accumulate over time until suddenly we realize the mountain we thought was impossible to climb has already been ascended step by careful step. The big promise of this chapter is liberating, because it tells you that you do not have to wait for your life to dramatically collapse or for some external event to shock you awake in order to change, and you do not have to carry the crushing weight of trying to rebuild yourself overnight. Instead, Wiest promises that you can begin right now, today, by making micro-shifts, tiny, deliberate choices that feel manageable, sustainable, and repeatable. And if you commit to them, they will add up to the radical transformation you've been longing for, not as a flash of brilliance, but as a steady rewiring of who you are and how you live. She explains that while breakthroughs can feel powerful and inspiring, they are often temporary if not supported by consistent, smaller actions. Think of a breakthrough like a lightning bolt. It lights up the sky for a moment. It changes your perspective instantly, but the light fades, and if you have not built new pathways through micro-shifts, you will fall back into old habits, because the body and mind crave consistency more than inspiration. Micro-shifts, on the other hand, are how you take the insight from that lightning strike and build it into the foundation of your life so that the change is no longer fragile but permanent. Wiest emphasizes that our nervous systems, our subconscious minds, and even our daily routines are designed to resist sudden, sweeping change because it feels unsafe, too unfamiliar. And so when we attempt to force ourselves into radical overnight reinventions, we trigger self-sabotage. The genius of micro-shifts is that they work with our wiring, not against it. By taking small, incremental steps, by slowly introducing new patterns, we allow our minds and bodies to adapt gradually, to build trust with the unfamiliar, to normalize what once felt impossible. This is why committing to drinking 1 glass of water in the morning can snowball into better health habits. Why speaking one truth a day can lead to authentic relationships. Why taking a 5-minute walk can eventually become a lifestyle of movement. And here's the most important promise. These micro-shifts are not insignificant. They are everything. Wiest stresses that small steps compound, and when compounded, they create momentum, and momentum is what changes the trajectory of a life. Imagine climbing a massive mountain, not by leaping to the top in one heroic jump, but by placing one foot in front of the other again and again, until the summit that once seemed unreachable suddenly lies beneath your feet. That is how transformation happens in real time, not in a single moment of triumph, but in the discipline of small, daily, intentional shifts that slowly reshape your identity. The chapter also reassures you that micro-shifts remove the pressure and perfectionism that so often paralyze us. If you believe change must happen all at once, you will hesitate to begin at all, because the task feels too heavy. But if you accept that change happens in micro-shifts, you free yourself to take one step, however small, and that one step is infinitely more powerful than waiting endlessly for a breakthrough that may never come. The promise here is that you no longer need to be extraordinary to change. You only need to be consistent. Wiest even points out that breakthroughs, when they do happen, are often the result of countless micro-shifts, not the cause. The moment you suddenly feel strong enough to leave a toxic relationship, for example, is usually built upon hundreds of small moments when you listened to yourself, honored your discomfort, and began believing you deserved more. The decision to launch a business might look like a bold leap from the outside, but in reality, it was the accumulation of years of micro-shifts, learning, saving, experimenting, building courage. This flips the narrative. You don't change in the breakthrough itself. The breakthrough is simply the visible marker of change that has already been happening quietly within you. The promise of this chapter is that you can stop waiting for permission, stop waiting for the perfect timing, stop waiting for the lightning strike, and instead claim the truth that every small step you take is the transformation, that every micro-shift is a breakthrough in disguise. And when you accept this, you stop idolizing some future version of yourself and start building her right now, through the simple, powerful act of consistency. So, the mountain of your life, the obstacles, the patterns, the fears, does not crumble in one dramatic landslide. It erodes slowly, steadily, as you chip away at it, piece by piece, shift by shift, until one day you realize the mountain is no longer blocking you, because you have already moved through it, transformed not by one great act, but by the 1,000 small ones that built the strength to climb. That is the promise Brianna Wiest leaves us with in this chapter. Lasting change is not born from dramatic breakthroughs. It is born from the micro-shifts you commit to every single day. And those micro-shifts, though small, are the true markers of transformation, the true steps of your climb, and the true way you conquer the mountain that is you. Chapter 3. Your mind is anti-fragile. Imagine for a moment that your mind is not fragile, not delicate, not something that cracks under pressure or breaks in the face of adversity, but instead, imagine it as anti-fragile, something that does not just withstand difficulty, but actually grows stronger because of it, something that thrives when challenged, adapts when tested, and transforms when exposed to stress. This is the powerful message of Brianna Wiest in the chapter Your Mind is Anti-Fragile, and it is one of the most liberating truths you can absorb. Your mind is not meant to crumble in the face of struggle, it is designed to evolve through it. The big promise of this chapter is profound, because it tells you that the very things you fear will break you. The heartbreaks, the failures, the disappointments, the uncertainties, are not signs that you are weak, but opportunities to become stronger, wiser, and more capable. Wiest assures you that pain is not just something to endure, but something that can be transformed into growth, that setbacks are not the end of your journey, but part of the process by which you become more resilient, more creative, and more alive. She borrows the concept of anti-fragility from Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who first described it in terms of systems that don't merely survive stress, but improve because of it. A fragile object shatters when dropped. A resilient object resists damage but stays the same. But an anti-fragile system actually evolves and becomes better after being tested. And here, Wiest makes the claim that your mind works exactly this way. Adversity is not the enemy. It is the raw material of your transformation. Think about your own life. The moments that changed you most deeply were rarely the easy, comfortable times. They were the moments when you were stretched beyond your limits, when something forced you to look inward, to adapt, to shift, to find a strength you didn't know you had. Maybe it was the loss of a job that pushed you into a career you actually loved. Maybe it was the end of a relationship that opened the door to self-respect and healthier love. Maybe it was failure in one direction that redirected you toward your true path. These moments hurt, but they also shaped you. And Wiest's point is that this shaping is not incidental. It is how your mind is designed to grow. The promise here is enormous. If you accept that your mind is anti-fragile, then you can stop fearing challenges as threats and start embracing them as opportunities. You can reframe your struggles, not as punishments or evidence of your inadequacy, but as training grounds for your expansion. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you can begin to ask, "What strength is this building in me?" This subtle shift is itself a form of anti-fragility. It transforms suffering into meaning and meaning into growth. Wiest emphasizes that much of our suffering comes not from pain itself, but from the way we resist it, the way we label it as bad, the way we assume it is a sign something has gone wrong. But when you understand that the mind is anti-fragile, you realize that pain is part of the process of becoming, that every challenge is sculpting you into someone stronger, and that your job is not to avoid discomfort at all costs, but to lean into it, to learn from it, to let it expand you. She makes another crucial point. Anti-fragility doesn't mean you seek out suffering recklessly. It doesn't mean you crave chaos or run toward pain. Rather, it means you trust yourself to grow from whatever life brings, that you build faith in your capacity to adapt. This trust changes everything, because when you know that struggle will strengthen you, you stop fearing change, you stop resisting growth, and you begin to meet life with openness rather than avoidance. The big promise of this chapter, then, is freedom. The freedom to stop tiptoeing around life, afraid of what might go wrong, and instead to step boldly into the unknown, knowing that even if it's messy, even if it's difficult, you will emerge stronger because of it. You no longer have to view your mind as something fragile that needs protection from every bump and bruise. You can view it as anti-fragile, a system designed to benefit from exactly the things you once thought would break you. Wiest illustrates that this is why people who have faced adversity often develop greater resilience, why those who endure failure often emerge more creative, why those who lose what they thought they could never live without often discover they are capable of building something even better. The anti-fragile mind is not afraid of falling because it knows every fall is a lesson, every wound is wisdom, every challenge is training. And perhaps the most hopeful promise of all is that this anti-fragility is not reserved for a chosen few. It is within you, right now. Every time you have survived something you thought would destroy you, every time you have adapted to something new, every time you have grown after being tested, you have proven this truth. You do not need to become anti-fragile. You already are. Your only task is to recognize it, to trust it, and to live into it. So let this chapter sink in. Your mind is not fragile glass that must be carefully protected, nor is it merely resilient steel that endures unchanged. Your mind is anti-fragile. It is alive, adaptive, capable of becoming better through the very things you fear most. And when you embrace this truth, you will no longer avoid the mountain in front of you, because you will know that every step of the climb, no matter how steep, is building the strength you need to rise. Chapter 4. What you get on the other side of healing. Imagine for a moment that you have spent years climbing a steep, treacherous mountain, every step heavy with the weight of your past, every breath labored with the fear and doubt that cling to you like shadows. And then, one day, after pushing forward despite setbacks, despite pain, despite the endless temptation to turn back, you finally reach the other side. What does that feel like? What do you find there? This is the vision Brianna Wiest gives us in the chapter What You Get on the Other Side of Healing, a chapter that does not just speak to the process of climbing, but to the reward, to the landscape of life that opens when the mountain of self-sabotage has been dismantled, when wounds have been faced and transformed, when healing has been chosen again and again until it becomes who you are. The big promise of this chapter is one of hope and vision. It tells you that the pain you are moving through is not meaningless, that the hard work of healing is not just about surviving, but about gaining access to a richer, fuller, freer version of life, one where you are no longer defined by your wounds, but guided by your wisdom, one where peace is not a fleeting moment, but a natural state, and one where you live from alignment rather than avoidance. Wiest explains that on the other side of healing, what you gain most of all is clarity. For so long, your pain and patterns distort the way you see yourself, the way you see others, and the way you see possibility. Unhealed wounds act like filters over your perception. Fear disguises itself as intuition, self-doubt masquerades as humility, chaos feels like passion, numbness feels like safety. But when you do the work of healing, when you face your shadows and release the need to recreate old pain, you begin to see clearly, and this clarity changes everything. Suddenly, you can recognize real love when it appears. You can distinguish between a true calling and a distraction. You can tell the difference between comfort that heals you and comfort that keeps you stuck. Another profound promise of this chapter is freedom. The freedom to stop living as a reaction to old wounds and to start living by conscious choice. So much of our self-sabotage comes from replaying the past, from unconsciously reenacting what hurt us because it feels familiar, from trying to control outcomes so we never feel vulnerable again. But once you have healed, those compulsions lose their grip. You no longer need to prove your worth through overachievement. You no longer need to chase love that only hurts. You no longer need to bury yourself in busyness to avoid facing yourself. Healing gives you freedom from the cycles that once ran your life. And with that freedom comes the ability to create, to choose, to live in alignment with your deepest truth. Wiest also highlights that what you get on the other side of healing is presence, the ability to actually be here, in this moment, instead of constantly pulled into regrets about the past or anxieties about the future. Pain keeps us time traveling, stuck in loops of what if and if only, but healing anchors us in now. And in that presence, we discover joy in the small things, peace in the ordinary, meaning in the moments we once overlooked. This presence is not about perfection or eternal happiness, but about a groundedness that allows you to move through life without being hijacked by every wave of emotion. Perhaps one of the greatest promises of this chapter is self-trust. When you are unhealed, you doubt yourself constantly, doubt your choices, your feelings, your worth. You may even believe that you cannot be trusted, that you are destined to sabotage yourself again and again. But healing restores that trust. You begin to recognize your own inner wisdom, to believe that you can handle challenges without collapsing, to know that you can rely on yourself no matter what. This self-trust is the foundation of confidence, resilience, and inner peace. And once you have it, you no longer seek validation from the outside world the way you once did. On the other side of healing, Wiest promises, you also gain the ability to love differently, not from a place of fear or need, but from a place of wholeness. When you are unhealed, you look for relationships to complete you, to soothe you, to make you feel enough. But when you are healed, you no longer approach love from emptiness. You approach it from abundance, from overflow, from the joy of sharing rather than the desperation of filling a void. This shift changes everything about how you connect with others. It brings depth, authenticity, and genuine intimacy. Another gift you receive is the capacity to create a life aligned with who you truly are. When pain dictates your choices, you often chase goals that are not even yours. You pursue identities that protect rather than express you. You live in ways that keep you small because small feels safe. Healing allows you to shed those false skins and step into what feels real, even if it is unfamiliar. You begin to choose work, relationships, environments, and habits that actually support your well-being. And as you do, you begin to experience what Wiest calls alignment, that deep sense that your outer life matches your inner truth. And maybe the most beautiful promise of all, peace. Healing doesn't mean life stops being difficult. Mountains will still rise, storms will still come. But peace means that you are no longer at war with yourself, no longer constantly sabotaging, no longer fighting shadows from the past. Peace is the quiet confidence that whatever comes, you can meet it, that you are not broken but whole, that you are not fragile but strong. It is the reward on the other side of healing, And once you taste it, you will know that every step up the mountain was worth it. So what do you get on the other side of healing? You get clarity, freedom, presence, self-trust, deeper love, alignment, and peace. You get yourself fully, wholly, unapologetically. And that is the great promise of this chapter, that the work of healing, as demanding and painful as it may be, is not just about fixing what was broken. It is about reclaiming the life you were always meant to live. Chapter 5. Moving from self-sabotage to self-mastery. Imagine standing at the base of a mountain you've climbed before, one that loomed large in your mind. A mountain built from old fears, unhealed wounds, and repeated patterns that pulled you backward even when you wanted to move forward. And now imagine realizing that the climb itself has been your greatest teacher, that every stumble, every misstep, every moment of resistance has been preparing you for something far greater. Not just survival, not just coping, but self-mastery, the kind of transformation that reshapes the way you think, feel, and act, that allows you to finally stop being your own obstacle and to step into the power you have always carried inside you. This is the essence of Brianna Wiest's chapter Moving from Self-Sabotage to Self-Mastery, a chapter that serves as both a roadmap and a manifesto for anyone ready to reclaim authority over their own life. The big promise of this chapter is profoundly liberating. It assures you that self-sabotage is not your destiny, that the patterns that have kept you stuck are not permanent, and that mastery over yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, your habits, is not only possible, but inevitable when you commit to conscious effort, self-awareness, and deliberate transformation. Wiest makes it clear that self-mastery is not an elite state reserved for a select few, nor is it an overnight achievement. It is the cumulative result of countless decisions, reflections, and micro-shifts that allow you to move from being reactive to being proactive, from being a prisoner of old patterns to being the author of your own story. Wiest explains that self-sabotage is rarely random or meaningless. It is the unconscious mind's misguided attempt to protect you from perceived threats, discomfort, and vulnerability. It manifests in procrastination, avoidance, self-criticism, and choices that undermine your potential, often in ways so subtle you may not even notice until you reflect on the patterns of your life. Yet, the chapter emphasizes, understanding these patterns is the first step toward mastery. When you begin to notice when and why you sabotage yourself, when you examine the underlying fears or misbeliefs, you begin to disrupt the cycle and create space for conscious choice. This is the pivot point. Awareness transforms what once controlled you into something you can guide. Wiest makes a critical distinction. Self-mastery is not about perfection, nor is it about eliminating all discomfort. On the contrary, it is about responding differently to discomfort, about leaning into challenges with curiosity rather than fear, about using resistance as a compass that shows where growth is needed. The chapter promises that the very discomfort that once triggered self-sabotage can, with intention and insight, become the engine of your evolution. You learn to meet fear with courage, uncertainty with patience, and pain with compassion, not as abstract concepts, but as daily practices that shape your identity over time. Central to this chapter is the idea of emotional literacy, the capacity to recognize, name, and respond to your emotions without judgment. Wiest emphasizes that mastering yourself requires honesty about how you feel and how those feelings influence your actions. You cannot change what you do not acknowledge. By cultivating this awareness, you begin to make decisions rooted in self-respect rather than avoidance, in clarity rather than confusion, and in long-term fulfillment rather than short-term relief. Every moment you pause to check in with yourself is a micro-shift toward mastery. Another cornerstone of self-mastery, as Wiest describes, is intentionality. It is not enough to understand your patterns. You must also consciously choose the behaviors, thoughts, and environments that support your growth. Mastery is an active practice. setting boundaries, nurturing habits that align with your values, creating routines that reinforce your goals, and consistently challenging the impulses that once led to self-sabotage. This is where the promise of freedom is found, the freedom to act deliberately rather than react unconsciously, the freedom to create a life in alignment with your deepest values rather than one dictated by fear. The chapter also illuminates the transformative power of patience and persistence. Self-mastery does not occur in dramatic breakthroughs alone. It is forged in the accumulation of small victories, in daily choices to show up for yourself even when it feels uncomfortable or tedious. Wiest reminds us that the climb from self-sabotage to mastery is gradual, and that each intentional act, no matter how small, compounds over time to create profound change. This is the promise of sustainable transformation, a life that is reshaped not by luck or fleeting motivation, but by disciplined, conscious, repeated action. Finally, the chapter promises integration. Self-mastery is not about denying your humanity or suppressing your vulnerabilities. It is about embracing them fully and using them as tools for growth. It is about understanding that the mountain of self-sabotage, once feared, can be climbed, and that on the other side lies a version of yourself who is wiser, stronger, and aligned, someone who does not merely survive but thrives, who acts from a place of self-respect and insight, and who knows that the power to shape your life was inside you all along. So what does moving from self-sabotage to self-mastery truly offer? It offers awareness, emotional intelligence, intentionality, resilience, patience, and integration. It offers the freedom to live deliberately, the clarity to choose what supports your growth, and the courage to face yourself without fear. It promises that the mountain of self-sabotage is not an endless barrier but a path, and as you climb it with insight and intention, you arrive not at perfection but at power. The power to create a life defined not by old patterns, but by conscious mastery of yourself. Chapter 6. Future Self-Work. Receiving the Keys to Your New Life. Imagine, for a moment, standing at a doorway you have always wanted to open, a doorway to a life that feels aligned, vibrant, and fully your own. Yet every day you notice yourself hesitating, fumbling with the lock, unsure of how to step through. That doorway is not some distant fantasy. It is your future self, waiting patiently for you to claim the keys. In the chapter Future Self-Work, Receiving the Keys to Your New Life, Brianna Wiest reveals that transformation is not something that happens randomly, nor is it the product of sheer willpower alone. Rather, it is a process of conscious connection, a deliberate alignment with the person you are becoming. And it is through this alignment that you gain access to the life you are truly capable of living. The big promise of this chapter is both practical and profoundly empowering. It assures you that the tools to create the life you desire are already within your grasp, that by cultivating a relationship with your future self, you can begin to make decisions, take actions, and embody habits today that unlock the reality you want tomorrow, and that this work is not about striving for perfection or imposing external pressure on yourself, but about tapping into the intelligence, insight, and wisdom of the self you are evolving into. Future self-work, Wiest suggests, is a form of internal mentorship, a daily dialogue with the version of you who has already overcome your current obstacles, who already navigates challenges with resilience, and who already embodies the strength, clarity, and purpose you seek. Wiest emphasizes that so much of self-sabotage arises from a disconnection between who we are today and who we want to be. When our present self acts from fear, habit, or avoidance, it undermines the vision of our future self and keeps us trapped in cycles of frustration. Future self-work bridges that gap. By intentionally imagining, visualizing, and even conversing with the version of yourself who has mastered the mountain you are climbing, you create a blueprint for action that is aligned with your deepest values and long-term goals, rather than fleeting impulses or reactive behaviors. In other words, your future self becomes both a guide and a motivator, helping you navigate the difficult terrain of change with clarity and direction. The chapter promises that this work is transformational because it shifts your decision-making from reaction to intentionality. When you ask, "What would my future self do in this moment?" or "Which choice aligns with the life I want to create?" you move beyond the limiting habits of your present self and tap into a wisdom that transcends immediate impulses. Suddenly, the decisions that once felt overwhelming or paralyzing become clear because they are informed not by fear, comfort, or self-doubt, but by the priorities and insights of the person you are becoming. This practice turns abstract goals into actionable steps and transforms self-sabotage into purposeful action. Wiest also points out that receiving the keys to your new life requires not only imagination, but trust. Trust that your future self is capable, trust that the vision you hold is attainable, and trust that the incremental choices you make today, though they may feel small or insignificant, compound over time to create profound transformation. This is where the chapter's promise becomes tangible. By connecting with your future self, you gain the confidence and clarity to take risks you once avoided, to release habits that no longer serve you, and to invest in the practices, relationships, and environments that nurture the life you truly desire. The chapter explores concrete ways to engage in future self-work. This can include journaling from the perspective of your future self, imagining how they would handle challenges, or writing letters of guidance and encouragement to yourself. Wiest emphasizes that these exercises are not gimmicks. They are ways of rewiring your mind to prioritize long-term growth over short-term comfort, to internalize the perspective of the person you are becoming, and to align your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors with your highest potential. When practiced consistently, future self-work transforms not just your actions, but your identity, allowing you to inhabit your evolving self in a fully embodied way. Another promise woven throughout the chapter is empowerment. Future self-work reminds you that the keys to your transformation are not outside of you, they are inside you. You do not need external validation, radical life changes, or perfect timing to start becoming the person you want to be. The doorway is always there, waiting, and the keys have been in your hands all along. By learning to act in alignment with your future self, you gradually dismantle the patterns of self-sabotage, you reclaim your agency, and you gain the capacity to create a life that feels both authentic and expansive. Finally, Wiest makes clear that future self-work is not a one-time exercise, but a lifelong practice. As you evolve, your vision of your future self deepens and grows more nuanced, your understanding of your values becomes clearer, and your capacity to navigate challenges with resilience strengthens. Each moment of alignment, each choice informed by your future self, is a step toward mastery, a step toward reclaiming your life, a step toward the freedom, clarity, and fulfillment that await on the other side of conscious transformation. In short, future self-work, receiving the keys to your new life, promises that the life you are dreaming of is accessible, not through luck or external circumstances, but through the deliberate cultivation of your own inner guidance. By connecting with your future self, you gain insight, clarity, trust, and the power to act from alignment rather than reaction. You gain the keys to unlock the door to your new life. And through this practice, you finally realize that the mountain you have been climbing was always guiding you toward the person you were meant to become. Chapter 7. See challenging times as opportunities for transformation. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm, wind howling around you, rain beating down, and the world seeming to conspire against every plan you've carefully made, every hope you've nurtured, every dream you've dared to hold. Now, imagine that storm is not a punishment, not an obstacle designed to break you, but a signal, a doorway, a call to something greater within you, something waiting to be awakened, something that will transform you if you choose to engage rather than resist. This is the central insight of Brianna Wiest's chapter See Challenging Times as Opportunities for Transformation, a chapter that reframes struggle not as an interruption to life, but as the very medium through which profound change occurs, the raw material for building resilience, self-mastery, and authentic growth. The big promise of this chapter is transformative. It assures you that hardship is not the enemy, that difficulty is not proof of failure, and that moments of tension, uncertainty, or discomfort are in fact the very forces that can catalyze your evolution, if you allow yourself to approach them with curiosity, courage, and intentionality. Wiest invites us to recognize that life does not give us challenges to punish us or to prove our limits, but to expand our capacity, to refine our character, and to reveal parts of ourselves that have been dormant or overlooked. In essence, every challenge carries the seeds of opportunity, and the promise of this chapter is that if you learn to see it that way, you can shift from a life of reaction and resistance to one of proactive transformation. Wiest explains that human beings naturally resist discomfort. The mind is wired to avoid pain, to seek stability, to retreat from what feels threatening or unfamiliar. Yet, it is precisely this resistance that keeps us trapped in cycles of stagnation. Self-sabotage often arises in response to challenging circumstances because the unconscious mind interprets change or difficulty as danger. The key, she emphasizes, is to recognize that difficulty itself is neutral. It is our interpretation, our reaction, and our willingness to engage that determines whether it becomes destructive or transformative. This is why challenging times are not to be feared, but embraced as laboratories of growth. The chapter makes the compelling argument that transformation often begins with perspective. When you encounter hardship, you can view it as evidence that life is against you, or you can see it as a mirror reflecting where you are resisting change, avoiding responsibility, or clinging to old patterns. Every moment of struggle provides critical information. What beliefs are holding you back? What habits are undermining your potential? What fears are dictating your choices? By leaning into these uncomfortable truths rather than fleeing from them, you harness the opportunity to rebuild yourself from the inside out. In other words, challenges are not detours. They are the road itself. Wiest also highlights that transformation in challenging times requires active engagement, not passive endurance. It is not enough to simply survive adversity. You must interact with it consciously, reflectively, and courageously. This involves asking yourself hard questions, examining your reactions, and making intentional choices about how to respond. Which thoughts are constructive, and which are self-sabotaging? Which actions move you toward your goals, and which keep you stuck? How can this difficulty teach you patience, resilience, or discernment? By treating challenges as opportunities rather than threats, you convert adversity into training for your higher self, and you develop skills and strength that cannot be gained in comfort. One of the chapter's profound promises is that transformation is not only internal, but also cumulative. Every challenge you face, every moment of resistance you overcome, every pattern of self-sabotage you interrupt adds up. Over time, these experiences compound, building a foundation of resilience, insight, and confidence. Wiest emphasizes that this is why those who face adversity with curiosity and courage often emerge stronger, wiser, and capable than those who have lived untested lives. Challenges, then, are not detours from your path. They are the path, the very ascent of your personal mountain. Wiest also notes that this approach to challenges cultivates empowerment. When you view hardship as an opportunity for transformation, you reclaim agency over your life. You are no longer a passive victim of circumstance. You are an active participant in your own growth. The storm becomes a teacher, the obstacle becomes a guide, and the difficulty becomes a gateway to the version of yourself you have always had the potential to become. The promise here is profound. The harder life pushes, the more it equips you to rise, to create, and to thrive in ways you could not have imagined in easier times. Finally, the chapter emphasizes that transformation through challenge requires patience and persistence. Growth is rarely instantaneous. It is a slow, deliberate process of reflection, experimentation, and adjustment. Each challenge is a step, not the summit. Each obstacle is a lesson, not a final verdict. Wiest assures us that if we embrace this perspective, if we approach life's storms with curiosity and intention, we will emerge not only stronger, but more aligned, more resilient, and more capable of creating a life that reflects our highest potential. In essence, see challenging times as opportunities for transformation. Promises that adversity is not something to avoid, nor is it a punishment, but a tool, a set of keys handed to you by life itself. When you stop resisting and start engaging, when you stop fearing difficulty and start interpreting it as guidance, you discover that the mountain of hardship is not a wall but a ladder, each challenge a rung leading you higher, closer to mastery, clarity, and the life you were always meant to create. Conclusion. As we reach the end of this journey together through the pages of The Mountain Is You, it becomes clear that the mountain we have been climbing is not out there in the world, looming impossibly in our path, but within ourselves, constructed from old fears, limiting beliefs, patterns of self-sabotage, and unresolved wounds. And the most profound promise Brianna Wiest extends throughout this book is that every step taken, every moment of reflection, every act of courage and intentional choice is not just movement forward, it is transformation, because the mountain itself, once understood and engaged with consciously, becomes the vehicle through which we reclaim our power, reshape our lives, and ascend into versions of ourselves we may have only imagined in fleeting dreams. The central revelation, the overarching truth, is that self-sabotage, long assumed to be a mark of weakness or failure, is instead a signal, a guidepost, a system designed by the mind and nervous system to protect us from what feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable, or unsafe. And this understanding is the foundation upon which all other promises of the book rest. When we stop seeing our self-sabotage as an enemy and start seeing it as a messenger, we unlock the ability to transform it into conscious action, to replace old destructive cycles with micro-shifts of intentional growth, and to move from a life dictated by fear and habit to one that is deliberate, empowered, and aligned with our deepest values. One of the first and most essential results Wiest promises is clarity, the kind of clarity that comes from seeing the mechanics of your own mind, recognizing the patterns that have held you hostage, and understanding the invisible rules you have unconsciously followed. With clarity comes awareness, and with awareness comes choice. No longer are your reactions automatic. No longer are your fears dictating your decisions. You learn to pause, to reflect, and to respond with insight rather than reflex. And in this space, the seeds of transformation begin to take root. The book also promises, and this is a promise of liberation, that self-mastery is attainable. Through understanding your inner workings, learning to reframe challenges, embracing the unfamiliar, and practicing consistent micro-shifts, you move from self-sabotage to intentional creation. This mastery is not about perfection or eliminating discomfort, but about cultivating the ability to navigate life consciously, to choose actions that align with your values, and to respond to setbacks, failures, and fears with resilience and purpose. You become the climber and the guide, the observer and the navigator, the one who holds the map to the life you want while simultaneously building the strength to walk it. Wiest makes it clear that transformation is anti-fragile. Challenges, setbacks, emotional pain, and periods of uncertainty are not interruptions to your progress. They are the very forces that sculpt your capacity for strength, creativity, and resilience. On the other side of healing, you gain freedom. freedom from the patterns that have limited you, freedom from the need for external validation, freedom from repeating cycles that drain your energy, and freedom to step fully into alignment with your truth. These are not abstract promises. They are practical, lived outcomes of committing to the work of climbing your internal mountain. Future self-work, another cornerstone of the book, promises something deeply empowering. By consciously connecting with the version of yourself who has already achieved mastery, you receive guidance, perspective, and the keys to decisions that will move you closer to that life each day. This practice transforms vague aspirations into actionable steps, fear into curiosity, and self-doubt into trust. The promise is that by aligning your present self with your future self, you begin to live the life you were meant to inhabit, not as a distant dream, but as a tangible, accessible reality. Healing, Wiest reminds us, is the gateway to the life we desire. On the other side of confronting your fears, traumas, and destructive patterns lies clarity, self-trust, alignment, authentic love, peace, and the capacity to create intentionally. Healing is not simply the removal of pain. It is the reclamation of your power, the restoration of your agency, and the ability to act with wisdom rather than reaction. It is the foundation upon which all other transformations, emotional, mental, and practical, are built. Finally, the book leaves us with the promise that challenging times are not obstacles to avoid but opportunities to engage with, laboratories for transformation, and catalysts for growth. Every difficulty, when approached with courage and awareness, becomes a teacher. Every setback becomes a rung on the ladder of mastery, and every uncomfortable moment becomes a chance to expand into the fullest version of yourself. The mountain does not vanish once you reach its peak. It is not meant to disappear. It is meant to guide, shape, and ultimately reveal who you are capable of being. So, the cumulative promise of the mountain is this. By understanding self-sabotage, practicing micro-shifts, embracing discomfort, cultivating your future self, engaging in healing, and viewing challenges as opportunities, you gain the clarity, freedom, self-mastery, resilience, alignment, and peace that you have always sought. You gain yourself, fully and unapologetically. You learn that the mountain was never in your way. It was your path. And the ultimate result, the profound transformation that this book invites you into, is not just surviving your life or enduring its difficulties, but rising consciously and courageously into the person you were always meant to be, capable of living a life that reflects the highest, most authentic version of yourself. If you found value in this journey through the mountain and want to continue transforming your mind, habits, and life, make sure to like and share this audiobook so others can climb their own mountains too. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Cliffnote Chronicles, for more powerful audiobook summaries, deep insights, and tools to help you turn every challenge into an opportunity for growth. Your next step toward clarity, mastery, and transformation is just a click away. Join us and keep climbing. Welcome back to today's audiobook, The Stoic Guide to Overcoming Pain and Adversity, and learn how to unlock your mental strength with meditation. Imagine for a moment that you're standing at the edge of history, the vast Roman Empire stretching out before you, its cities humming with trade, its armies guarding distant frontiers, and at its center, an emperor burdened with responsibilities we can hardly fathom. Now picture that same emperor, ruler of millions, the most powerful man in the known world, sitting quietly by lamplight, writing notes to himself, not speeches for the Senate, not decrees for the provinces, but private reflections, reminders, and meditations about how to live a good life, how to remain just, how to hold on to humility while holding supreme power. That man is Marcus Aurelius, and that set of notes became one of the most remarkable and enduring books in all of human history, Meditations. And before you dive into his raw and timeless words, Gregory Hayes, the translator of this masterpiece, offers you an introduction, a kind of doorway into Marcus's mind, his world, and the philosophy that guided him. Think of this introduction as your map, helping you understand not only who Marcus was, but why his words carry such authority even now, nearly 2,000 years later. The introduction begins by placing Marcus in context. He was not just a philosopher, not just a thinker, but an emperor, a man who held in his hands the fate of the Roman world. And yet, he never saw himself as a philosopher king in the heroic Platonic sense. Instead, he thought of himself as a student, imperfect, learning day by day. This humility is the first big promise of the introduction, that greatness and wisdom do not require perfection, but persistence. Even if you hold unimaginable power, life is still about practicing, still about improving, still about asking hard questions of yourself. As the introduction unfolds, you hear of Marcus's early life, a boy born into privilege, raised by a grandfather after losing his father early, surrounded by teachers who instilled in him discipline, rhetoric, and philosophy. Rome at that time was a bilingual world, Greek for philosophy, Latin for public life, and Marcus absorbed both. He studied literature and oratory, but what truly seized his soul was philosophy. And here comes another promise, that philosophy is not some dry academic exercise but a way of life, a toolkit for living with dignity in a world of chaos. Marcus didn't approach philosophy to write scholarly essays. He approached it as medicine for the soul, as a guide for endurance, clarity, and service. The introduction explains the Stoic tradition, the framework in which Marcus thought. Stoicism rests on a profound belief that the universe is ordered by a rational principle, logos, and that our happiness depends not on what happens to us, but on how we interpret and respond to it. Here lies perhaps the greatest promise of all. No matter the storms raging around you, whether wars, plagues, betrayals, or the heavy weight of responsibility, you can choose how to perceive them, how to act in response, and how to align your will with nature. This is the essence of freedom, the inner citadel of the mind that no external force can conquer. The introduction also makes it clear that Marcus was writing in times of immense stress. Wars on the frontiers, rebellion within the empire, even plagues sweeping through his cities. He knew suffering, he knew loss, and yet he returned to his notebook again and again, writing not to impress others but to strengthen himself. And the promise we hear is this: philosophy is not theory, it is practice. Just as a soldier drills daily to prepare for battle, so too must a human being train daily in perspective, action, and will. These three disciplines, seeing reality clearly, acting justly toward others, and accepting fate with courage, form the heartbeat of his thought. And so the introduction gently warns you, don't expect a polished treatise or a neat essay. What you hold in your hands is not a book written for you at all, but one written by Marcus, for Marcus. That's precisely why it feels so intimate, so powerful. You are eavesdropping on the emperor's inner voice, on his attempts to steady himself, to remind himself of what matters, to rehearse again and again the truths he already knew but needed to feel in his bones. The promise here is almost paradoxical. By listening in on Marcus talking to himself, you learn how to talk to yourself, how to master your own restless thoughts, how to find strength in solitude. So as this introduction closes, it leaves you with a need and an invitation. The need is universal. We all face struggles. We all carry burdens. We all wrestle with anger, fear, desire, and grief. The invitation is what Marcus offers, a way to meet those struggles with calmness, justice, and resilience, not by escaping the world, but by standing firm in it. That is why Meditations has survived when empires have crumbled, because it promises not eternal power, not endless wealth, but something infinitely more precious, a way to be human, fully, wisely, and well, no matter what life brings. Debts and lessons. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a ruler of the vast Roman Empire, a man who commanded armies, who was burdened with petitions from senators, citizens, and generals, who carried the weight of the known world on his shoulders. And yet when he sat down to write, the very first thing he put to paper was not a list of victories, not speeches of power, but a quiet roll call of gratitude. Debts and lessons. That's how Book 1 of Meditations begins, and it's unlike anything you'd expect from an emperor. Instead of boasting, Marcus Aurelius takes stock of all the people who shaped him: parents, teachers, mentors, friends, even the gods. The great promise of this first book is simple yet profound. No matter how high you rise, you are never self-made. The roots of your character are nourished by the examples, sacrifices, and wisdom of others, and the way to live well is to remember those debts with humility and gratitude. Marcus begins by thanking his family. He honors his grandfather for teaching him integrity, self-discipline, and simplicity of lifestyle. From his mother, he learned piety and generosity, and from his father, though Marcus lost him early in life, he absorbed by reputation a sense of modesty and decency. These are not small things, and he does not present them as inherited gifts of fortune, but as lessons he must keep alive. Here, the promise to the listener is that gratitude is not passive memory. It is an active practice of carrying forward what others instilled in you, of continuing their virtues in your own choices. Then Marcus turns to his teachers and mentors, and the names roll out like a litany: Diognetus, Rusticus, Maximus, Sextus. Each one represents a different virtue he wanted to carve into his soul. From Diognetus, he learned to distrust superstition and to love truth. From Rusticus, perhaps his most influential teacher, he learned the value of philosophy not as theory, but as a daily discipline, and to avoid empty showmanship. From Maximus, he took the example of calmness under pressure and a cheerful resilience in adversity. From Sextus, he saw firsthand the union of kindness, dignity, and reason. The emperor is saying, look at the people around you, because their lives are mirrors. Learn from their example, avoid their errors, and copy their strengths. That's a big promise. Wisdom doesn't come from locking yourself away. It comes from observing, imitating, and being humble enough to learn. One of the most moving parts of Debts and Lessons is Marcus's tribute to his adoptive father, Antoninus Pius, who raised him not as a prince, but as a man. Antoninus was patient, fair, modest, respectful of others, and unwavering in duty. He showed Marcus that you could hold the throne and still remain humane, that true power is exercised with restraint, justice, and compassion. This is not just history, it's instruction. The promise here is that leadership, whether in an empire, a household, or a workplace, must be rooted in character, not domination. And finally, Marcus thanks the gods themselves, not for making him emperor, not for giving him victory in battle, but for the quieter mercies, that he was blessed with good teachers, that he was spared the ruin of bad habits, that he enjoyed the companionship of noble friends, and that he had the chance to live under models of virtue. The promise tucked inside this gratitude is that you can choose what to see as fortune. Wealth and status are not the measure, but the people and opportunities that shape your moral life. So what do we take away from Debts and Lessons? Marcus is modeling the discipline of gratitude as a foundational exercise. Before he teaches himself how to endure pain, how to face death, how to govern his impulses, he grounds himself in memory. Here is who made me. Here is what I owe. And the promise to you, the listener, is that by practicing gratitude, by remembering the lessons you've been given, by honoring the debts you carry, you create a foundation of humility and strength. Gratitude becomes not a sentimental act, but a moral anchor, reminding you that whatever trials you face, you do not stand alone, You are the product of countless lives poured into yours. In the end, Debts and Lessons is Marcus Aurelius's way of saying that the path to wisdom begins not with pride, but with remembrance. To be a good man, a just leader, a resilient soul, you must first look back and say thank you. That is the quiet but powerful promise of this first book. If you can live with gratitude, you can live with strength. The Inner Citadel. Imagine a fortress, not built of stone or guarded by soldiers, but a fortress inside your own mind, a stronghold no enemy can breach, no misfortune can topple, no insult can penetrate. Marcus Aurelius calls this place the Inner Citadel, and it stands at the heart of meditations. In the chaos of war, in the uncertainty of illness, in the noise of politics and court intrigue, this is where he retreats, not to escape the world, but to anchor himself within it. And the need for such a citadel is as urgent for us today as it was for him. We live in a world of constant distractions, demands, and pressures, and yet we too carry within us a space of freedom, if only we choose to cultivate it. That's the promise Marcus whispers across the centuries, that true safety, true strength, is not out there in wealth or status or control over others, but in here, in your own reasoned soul. The inner citadel is built of perception, choice, and will. Marcus teaches that nothing outside of you can truly harm you unless you let it inside. Pain, poverty, betrayal, even death. These are events, but the judgment that they are bad belongs to you, and you can withhold it. That is the first big promise, that suffering is not in the thing itself, but in how we see it. Think of it. How often do we collapse not because of what actually happens, but because of the story we tell ourselves about it? The emperor reminds himself, again and again, to strip events of their drama, to see them plainly, and in that clarity to protect his soul from needless torment. And then there is the discipline of action. The citadel is not a place for hiding, but for gathering strength to act justly. Marcus insists that the purpose of human life is to live in harmony with others, to serve the common good, to fulfill our nature as rational and social beings. Even when surrounded by people who are selfish, petty, or malicious, he writes, "They are my kin, not by blood but by reason." Here's the second promise, that your fortress does not isolate you. It prepares you to live rightly among others, to meet injustice not with bitterness but with fairness, to meet cruelty not with vengeance but with restraint. The citadel also teaches acceptance. Fate may hand you illness, loss, or death itself, and Marcus urges you to remember that these are natural, inevitable parts of existence. The promise is paradoxical, yet liberating. When you stop demanding that the universe arrange itself to your liking, you find peace even in the midst of chaos. Just as a soldier must learn not to fear the battlefield, but to meet it with courage, so must each of us learn to meet life's blows with dignity, knowing they cannot touch the essence of who we are. And finally, the inner citadel reveals the deepest promise of Stoicism, that freedom is not political, not economic, but psychological. You may be a slave in chains or an emperor on a throne. It doesn't matter. Your mind, if rightly trained, is free. Marcus himself, who wielded power that could command armies, knew that the real battle was within, the daily struggle to keep his mind clear, his will aligned with nature, his actions just. That is why he wrote not to the Senate or the legions, but to himself, reminding himself to retreat into the citadel when the world pressed too hard. So as you listen to this teaching, imagine your own citadel. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you choose patience over anger, every time you accept what fate delivers without despair, you are laying stones in its walls. And the big promise Marcus offers is that once built, this fortress cannot fall. No insult can raise it. No loss can destroy it. No death can breach it. Within your own reasoned soul lies a freedom so complete that nothing external can ever take it away. That is the inner citadel, and that is where true strength resides. Living with nature's order. Imagine waking up and realizing that everything around you, the rising sun, the changing seasons, the birth and death of creatures, even the smallest leaf drifting to the ground, is part of a vast, rational order, a cosmic design in which nothing is random and nothing is wasted. This is how Marcus Aurelius saw the world, and it is the foundation of what we call living with nature's order. He believed that the universe itself is governed by logos, a rational principle, a kind of divine reason that holds all things together. And here is where the need strikes us. In our modern lives, we often feel the opposite, that the world is chaotic, unfair, and indifferent to our struggles. But Marcus promises that peace and strength come not from fighting the current, but from learning to flow with it, to recognize that everything happens as part of a larger pattern, and our role is not to resist, but to participate. For Marcus, the order of nature was not a philosophical abstraction. It was a practical truth that guided his daily actions. He saw himself as a citizen not just of Rome, but of the universe, a part of something infinitely larger than himself. When he sat in judgment, when he dealt with petitions, when he suffered loss or illness, he reminded himself, this, too, is nature at work. The promise here is liberating. When you accept that the world unfolds according to a design greater than your own, you can let go of the anger and frustration that arise from wishing things were otherwise. Imagine the relief of not having to control everything, of realizing that much of life is not a personal attack, but simply the natural course of events. Marcus also insists that to live in harmony with nature means to fulfill your own nature. What is the nature of a human being? It is not to hoard, not to dominate, not to indulge every whim, but to reason, to act justly, and to live for the good of the community. A bee serves the hive, a hand serves the body, and so a person must serve the larger whole of humanity. The promise here is profound. When you align your life with your true purpose, to act with justice, courage, and reason, you find both peace and power, because you are no longer fighting yourself or the universe. This perspective also transforms how we see hardship. Illness, aging, loss, even death, these are not cosmic errors, but essential parts of the natural cycle. To resist them is to resist reality itself. Marcus urges himself to remember that the same nature that made him also made the processes that will undo him, and therefore nothing that happens is foreign to him. The promise is that by embracing change as natural, you can free yourself from fear. Death is not an enemy. It is simply a return, like a leaf falling back to the soil that nourished it. And perhaps the deepest promise in living with nature's order is freedom, not the freedom to bend reality to your will, but the freedom that comes when your will is aligned with reality. When you live in this way, every obstacle becomes an opportunity to practice virtue. Every difficulty becomes a chance to show resilience, and every moment, no matter how small, becomes a piece of the larger harmony. So, when Marcus tells us to live with nature's order, he is not urging passive resignation, but active cooperation with the universe. He is saying, remember that you belong to a vast and beautiful whole, that your duty is to act according to your nature, and that peace comes not from conquering the world, but from aligning yourself with it. The big promise is this: when you stop demanding that life be different, when you see yourself as part of the cosmic design, you unlock a serenity that no misfortune can touch and a strength that no chaos can shake. That is the power of living with nature's order. The shortness of life. Imagine, if you will, the weight of time pressing upon every human soul, a river that flows relentlessly, carrying with it both our ambitions and our illusions. And consider how Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor, philosopher, and man intimately acquainted with both power and mortality, confronts this river in the pages of Meditations. In the chapter titled The Shortness of Life, he urges us not merely to acknowledge the brevity of existence, but to confront it with the clarity and rigor of reason, to recognize that life, though fleeting, is sufficient if we use it well, and to resist the hypnotic distractions of triviality that consume the hours and days we are so precariously lent. Marcus' reflections are neither mournful nor indulgent. They are urgent, practical, and profoundly liberating, for they offer a promise as enduring as it is transformative, that by mastering our attention, by refusing to surrender ourselves to idle passions, and by aligning our actions with nature and virtue, we can live fully within the confines of a life that is, in its raw terms, astonishingly brief. Marcus begins with a startling assertion that shocks modern sensibilities only because we have become habituated to the illusion of endless tomorrows. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. With this, he reframes mortality not as a limitation, but as an opportunity, a clarion call to mindfulness. The promise embedded here is profound. Life is not inherently insufficient. It is our careless management of it, our indulgence in vanity, gossip, resentment, and the endless pursuit of wealth or recognition that renders it inadequate. Marcus urges us to recalibrate our priorities, to focus our energy on what is within our control, our own reason, our own judgments, our own actions, and to abandon what lies beyond it. By doing so, he assures us, we reclaim a kind of immortality, the power to live fully and well within the finite span allotted to us. He warns against the hypnotic pull of social expectation, the numbing rituals of routine that dull our awareness of time slipping away. The lives of others, the endless parade of public opinion, ambition, and status, are not only irrelevant to our true flourishing, he insists, but actively corrosive if allowed to dominate our attention. We are always complaining that our days are few, and acting as though there would be no end to them, he writes, highlighting a paradox that resonates as sharply today as it did in the 2nd century. Humans often live as though eternity is guaranteed, squandering moments on trivialities, postponing virtue and reflection until some indefinite future. In his voice, there is both admonition and encouragement. Recognize the value of the present moment, seize it, and you seize life itself. Aurelius also confronts death, not as a grim specter, but as a natural conclusion, an event neither to be feared nor to be resisted with futility. The promise here is liberating. By accepting death as inevitable, we remove its power to terrify, and we gain clarity to invest in meaningful pursuits. Every day, he reminds us, is an opportunity to cultivate our rational faculties, to act justly, to contribute to the common good, and to refine our character. It is in this alignment with reason and nature that life's brevity transforms from a limitation into a call to excellence. The overarching promise of the shortness of life, and of Meditations as a whole, is nothing short of revolutionary in its simplicity. You do not need more time to achieve a worthwhile life. You need mastery over how you live the time you already have. Marcus offers a philosophical antidote to distraction, an invitation to live deliberately, and a reassurance that even amidst external chaos, inner peace and purpose are attainable. Every wasted moment is a moment surrendered to death unfulfilled, but every act of reflection, every exercise of virtue, is a small victory over the relentless erosion of time. By internalizing this, Marcus suggests, we can meet our end with equanimity, knowing we have truly lived. In essence, the shortness of life is both sobering and empowering. It strips away illusion, leaving us face to face with the unvarnished truth that our days are numbered, yet it also arms us with a strategy to live richly. Focus on what is under your control, let go of the trivial, act in accordance with virtue, and embrace the fleeting nature of existence with courage and clarity. The big promise of Marcus Aurelius' writing here is a life unshackled from fear, waste, and distraction, a life where every day, no matter how brief, can be meaningful, intentional, and fully our own. On control and surrender. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, churning sea, the waves of circumstance crashing against you from all directions, unpredictable, indifferent, and yet entirely beyond your power to change. This is the terrain Marcus Aurelius navigates in On Control and Surrender, a meditation that pulses with the quiet authority of a man who has wrestled not only with the burdens of empire, but with the universal human struggle of distinguishing what is truly ours from what is forever outside our reach. In this passage, he extends an invitation that is at once both profoundly simple and devastatingly transformative. Recognize the boundaries of your control, relinquish the illusion of mastery over the uncontrollable, and devote yourself wholly to the cultivation of your own mind, your judgments, and your responses. The promise embedded within these reflections is immense. A life liberated from anxiety, frustration, and needless suffering. A life in which the chaos of the external world can touch you only as much as you allow it, and where peace and virtue reside entirely within your sovereign grasp. Marcus begins with a startling clarity, stripping away the comforting but dangerous fiction that humans can shape the world to their desires. He observes that the external events of life, whether the betrayals of friends, the whims of fortune, the rise and fall of wealth, or the inexorable advance of illness and death, exist entirely outside our control, and yet, all too often, humans tie their happiness, their sense of self-worth, and their emotional equilibrium to precisely these unpredictable forces. If you are pained by external things, he writes, it is not they that disturb you, but your own judgment about them. Here lies the cornerstone of his philosophy, the subtle but radical promise. Mastery over the mind grants mastery over experience. By surrendering the illusion of control over what is inherently uncontrollable, we reclaim an inner realm that is ours alone, a domain of serenity that cannot be invaded by fortune, fate, or the caprice of others. He emphasizes that this is not passivity, nor is it resignation. Rather, it is active engagement with the only sphere in which human beings can exercise true agency, their own reasoned choices. Marcus repeatedly returns to the metaphor of nature, reminding us that the universe operates according to its own logic, and it is folly to demand that it conform to our preferences. To resist its flow is to court frustration, but to align with it, to act rightly within the boundaries of what we can influence, is to participate in life with both wisdom and dignity. This alignment requires courage and self-discipline, for it entails letting go of attachment to outcomes, relinquishing resentment, and refusing to invest our energies in battles we cannot win. In doing so, we not only protect ourselves from suffering, he suggests, but we unlock the potential for contentment, purpose, and virtue in a world that is otherwise indifferent. Marcus' reflections On Control and Surrender are also deeply moral. He insists that while we cannot govern the behavior of others, we can govern our response to it. Every slight, every insult, every act of injustice presents an opportunity to exercise patience, compassion, and reason. To surrender is not to submit to evil or wrongdoing. It is to refuse to compound the wrong with our own reactive disturbance. Here lies another of the book's profound promises. Freedom is found not in the power to bend the world, but in the discipline to bend oneself rightly. By mastering our inner life, we achieve a sovereignty more enduring than wealth, more secure than influence, and more satisfying than any external success. Throughout this meditation, the recurring theme is clarity. Identify what is yours, claim it, and let go of the rest. Marcus reassures us that human life is sufficient when lived in this way, that contentment is not found in manipulating fortune, but in cultivating virtue, reason, and equanimity. He offers the reader a vision of a life in which anxiety dissipates, resentment dissolves, and the heart, unshackled from attachment to the uncontrollable, moves with confidence, courage, and calm toward every task, every challenge, and every encounter. The promise of this teaching is nothing less than radical liberation, a path through the turbulence of existence in which we are never enslaved by circumstance, never battered by external chaos, but instead anchored in the indomitable power of our own mind. In essence, On Control and Surrender is a manual for reclaiming sovereignty over one's life. It teaches that peace is not granted by the world, but by the disciplined cultivation of judgment, virtue, and self-mastery. Marcus Aurelius shows that surrender is not weakness but wisdom, that control is not dominion over externals but mastery of the self, and that the true promise of philosophy is a life lived with resilience, clarity, and freedom, no matter what storms rage beyond our door. It is a call to live deliberately, to measure every reaction against reason, and to understand that happiness, serenity, and moral integrity are entirely within our grasp if, and only if, we release what we cannot hold. The brotherhood of man. Imagine, if you will, the vast tapestry of human existence, a web of countless lives interwoven in ways both visible and invisible, where each person, each action, and each thought reverberates across the shared space of the world, shaping not only individual destiny, but the destiny of the collective. And within this intricate network, Marcus Aurelius urges us to see something both profound and radical, that we are inherently connected, morally, spiritually, and intellectually, to every other human being, that to live in accordance with virtue is not merely a private pursuit, but a participation in the welfare of the whole, and that our true flourishing depends on recognizing and honoring this deep, unbreakable fellowship of humanity. In the brotherhood of man, Aurelius articulates a philosophy that is both ethical and practical, a guide to living that promises liberation from isolation, resentment, and moral confusion by embedding the individual self within the natural and rational order of human society. The promise here is immense, a life of purpose, serenity, and fulfillment that comes not from indulgence or self-interest, but from aligning oneself with the shared destiny of humankind, acting rightly, justly, and with empathy toward others. Marcus begins with a fundamental observation that echoes throughout Meditations. Humans are social creatures by nature. He reminds us that the ability to reason, to choose, and to act virtuously is meaningless if it is detached from its proper context, community. To live apart from others, to act without regard for the collective good, is to betray not only the potential of one's own rational faculties, but also the very nature of what it means to be human. Here, he introduces a profound promise. If we accept and embrace our social nature, if we cultivate patience, empathy, and a sense of duty toward others, we step into a life of moral coherence and inner peace, a life where conflict, frustration, and bitterness are mitigated because our actions and expectations are grounded in the reality of shared human experience rather than in selfish desire or isolation. He emphasizes that this recognition of human interdependence carries with it obligations that are both ethical and practical. Every encounter, every relationship, is an opportunity to exercise virtue, kindness, fairness, honesty, and tolerance. And every failure to do so is a missed chance to participate in the broader moral fabric of society. Marcus warns against the corrosive effects of self-centeredness, resentment, and envy, noting that these attitudes not only harm others, but also corrode the integrity of the individual. In his reflections, he insists that true wisdom is inseparable from social responsibility. One cannot cultivate reason and virtue in isolation, for virtue expresses itself through action, and meaningful action always engages the world beyond the self. In other words, the promise of philosophy, as Marcus presents it here, is not abstract or solitary. It is deeply communal, offering the possibility of a life in which ethical living strengthens both the individual and the society to which the individual belongs. Marcus also speaks to the inevitability of human imperfection, the reality that others will err, behave selfishly, or act in ways that seem unjust or unreasonable. Yet, rather than giving license to anger or alienation, he urges a broader perspective. Understand that these flaws are part of the human condition, that the same reasoning and moral capacities that allow you to recognize virtue also allow you to recognize error without being consumed by it, and that your response, measured, compassionate, and just, is where your moral power truly lies. Here, the book offers a transformative promise. By cultivating patience and understanding toward others, by seeing yourself as part of an interdependent whole rather than as a solitary agent besieged by injustice, you achieve both personal serenity and moral efficacy, creating ripples of virtue that extend far beyond your immediate perception. Throughout the Brotherhood of Man, Aurelius underscores the importance of perspective, reminding us that humans are temporary actors in a universe governed by reason and natural law, and that the petty grievances, slights, and conflicts that dominate our attention are often trivial in the grand scheme. By adopting this broader lens, by understanding your place within the rational order of the cosmos and your obligations to fellow humans, you unlock the promise of a life both meaningful and unshakable, a life in which ethical action is inseparable from psychological well-being, and where the cultivation of virtue fosters harmony both within and without. In essence, the Brotherhood of Man is a call to recognize the unity of human experience, to act with justice and empathy in every interaction, and to understand that personal fulfillment is inseparable from the welfare of the collective. Marcus Aurelius promises a life of moral clarity, social coherence, and enduring inner peace to those who accept their role as part of a larger human family, a life in which the pursuit of virtue is not a solitary struggle, but a contribution to the enduring order of humanity itself. By embracing this vision, we learn that our lives, though individually brief and fragile, gain meaning and resilience through connection, service, and the shared pursuit of reason and goodness. Responding to insults and injustice. Picture yourself navigating the intricate and often turbulent terrain of human interaction, a world in which words can wound, actions can betray, and circumstances beyond your control can provoke irritation, resentment, or even fury. And yet, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher whose life straddled both immense power and the inevitability of human vulnerability, offers guidance that is simultaneously stern and liberating, teaching that how we respond to the offenses and injustices of others is entirely within our power, and that mastery over this inner domain is the key to freedom, serenity, and moral integrity. In responding to insults and injustice, Aurelius presents a philosophy not of passivity, but of rational, principled action, a guide to confronting the slights and aggressions of life in a way that preserves dignity, protects the mind from unnecessary disturbance, and cultivates virtue even amid provocation. The promise of this teaching, as with much of Meditations, is profound. By disciplining your judgments, by refusing to be consumed by anger or resentment, and by acting in alignment with reason and nature, you achieve a life in which external harm cannot diminish your inner equilibrium, where moral clarity and personal freedom are accessible regardless of circumstance. Marcus begins with the startlingly clear assertion that the insults, injustices, and misbehavior of others are not in themselves harmful. They only appear so when interpreted through the lens of anger, pride, or resentment. He writes that to be wronged is not truly to be wronged. Rather, the offense only exists in our own judgment, in the internal narrative we create around the external act. This insight is both liberating and challenging, for it places the locus of control squarely within the individual. The world cannot injure you unless you allow it, and the true measure of your character is found in how you choose to perceive and respond to slights. The promise here is immense. No matter the injustice you face, no matter the insult delivered with malice or carelessness, you can remain unshaken, cultivating a mind that is imperturbable, rational, and morally aligned. And in doing so, you gain a freedom far greater than any external victory could provide. He urges a deliberate, reasoned approach to response, emphasizing that retaliation motivated by anger, revenge, or pride is a surrender of reason and virtue. To repay insult with insult is to act against nature and against your own rational faculties. It is to hand over the control of your emotional life to the whims of another. Marcus' prescription is radical in its simplicity, yet profound in its effect. Understand the human condition. Recognize that others act from ignorance, error, or misjudgment, and meet their behavior with calmness, patience, and justice. The promise here is transformative. By training the mind to respond in alignment with reason rather than emotion, every encounter with injustice becomes an opportunity to exercise virtue, and each act of measured response strengthens the inner fortress of the self, leaving external circumstances powerless to dictate emotional state. Marcus also underscores the idea that human failings are universal, and that empathy is a necessary component of responding wisely to insult or injustice. Just as you are subject to error, so too are others. Just as you seek understanding and compassion for your own missteps, so must you extend it to the misdeeds of others. This is not weakness or acquiescence, but the cultivation of moral strength. For the truly powerful person is one who can remain steadfast and principled in the face of provocation, who can act justly without being compelled by anger, and who can preserve tranquility of mind even when confronted by the harshness of the world. Marcus' promise is audacious yet profoundly practical. By mastering your responses, you achieve sovereignty over yourself, the only domain in life where true freedom resides, and in doing so, you live ethically and peacefully in a world that is often neither ethical nor peaceful. Throughout responding to insults and injustice, Aurelius repeatedly emphasizes that the key to enduring contentment lies in the discipline of judgment and the exercise of virtue. Insults and injustices are inevitable, but they only harm you if you permit them to disturb your reason, your peace, or your moral integrity. By cultivating the habit of reflection, by interpreting the actions of others through the lens of nature and reason, and by responding with justice, patience, and clarity, you fulfill the promise of philosophy itself, a life in which external adversity cannot diminish your inner worth, a life in which happiness is neither contingent on fortune nor at the mercy of others, but grounded in the deliberate, virtuous, and rational governance of the self. In essence, responding to insults and injustice is a masterclass in emotional sovereignty, moral courage, and practical wisdom. Marcus Aurelius promises a life in which the provocations, offenses, and errors of others no longer hold power over your peace or your integrity. A life in which every challenge becomes a test of virtue and every misdeed an opportunity for moral excellence. A life in which freedom, serenity, and ethical clarity are attainable, no matter the turbulence of the external world. By internalizing this teaching, the reader gains not only a method for enduring the inevitable wrongs of life, but also a path to becoming a person whose mind is unshakable, whose heart is just, and whose life fulfills the highest potential of reason and human nature. The vanity of fame and wealth. Imagine, if you will, the clamor of human ambition, the The relentless chase for recognition, the hunger for prestige, the obsession with wealth, power, and status that dominates the lives of millions across time. And consider the voice of Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who stood at the pinnacle of worldly authority, yet turned his gaze inward with a philosopher's discernment, warning that all such pursuits are fleeting, hollow, and ultimately inconsequential in the face of mortality and the demands of virtue. In the vanity of fame and wealth, Marcus invites us to confront a truth that is at once uncomfortable and liberating. The accolades, riches, and renown for which so many sacrifice their peace and moral integrity are but illusions, fragile shadows that disappear with time, and to stake one's life on them is to surrender to futility, vanity, and the inevitable dissatisfaction that arises when the world fails to deliver what it cannot possibly guarantee. The promise of this meditation is immense, for Marcus does not merely critique ambition. He offers a transformative alternative. By redirecting our energies toward reason, virtue, and the proper governance of our own character, we claim a form of wealth, fame, and power that is enduring, unassailable, and fully within our grasp. The cultivation of a life that is meaningful, ethical, and serene, impervious to the whims of fortune. Marcus begins with a stark observation. Fame and wealth, though often pursued with feverish intensity, are fundamentally beyond our control and intrinsically empty. They depend on the judgments and favor of others, on circumstances that are capricious and unpredictable, and on the passage of time that inevitably erodes all human achievements. He reminds us that those who chase these external markers of success often do so at the expense of the inner life, squandering their reason, their integrity, and their capacity for virtue on endeavors that will neither enrich their souls nor endure beyond their own fleeting existence. This insight is liberating, for it places the locus of value within the individual. If the world cannot provide lasting fame or wealth, it remains entirely possible to cultivate qualities that are permanent: wisdom, justice, courage, temperance, and the disciplined governance of one's own mind. Here lies one of the big promises of the book, that true abundance is internal, residing not in the accolades of others, but in the sovereign mastery of one's own character, and that a life directed by reason and virtue can be infinitely more satisfying than any material gain or social recognition. He emphasizes the transient and often corrosive nature of worldly recognition. Fame is subject to distortion, gossip, envy, and forgetfulness. Wealth can be stolen, lost, or devalued. To anchor one's sense of worth to these things is to build on sand, and Marcus repeatedly contrasts this fragility with the permanence of virtue and rational living. He encourages us to examine what is genuinely valuable, to distinguish between appearances and reality, and to commit ourselves to pursuits that contribute to the development of the mind and the betterment of others, rather than to the accumulation of superficial symbols of status. The promise here is profound. When you cease to pursue what is fleeting and instead dedicate yourself to what is enduring, you achieve a stability of mind, a peace of soul, and a clarity of purpose that cannot be shaken by fortune, envy, or time itself. Marcus also explores the moral consequences of attaching ourselves to fame and wealth. He warns that these pursuits often corrupt the soul, leading to greed, vanity, envy, and cruelty, and that those who sacrifice virtue for external gain find themselves enslaved to desires that can never be fully satisfied. In contrast, he asserts, the wise person cultivates contentment and self-sufficiency through reasoned choice, understanding that the only true good is the development of character and the fulfillment of one's moral and rational potential. This is a radical promise. By turning inward, by valuing virtue over recognition, by mastering oneself rather than attempting to master the world, one attains a kind of freedom, a security, and a satisfaction that the external world can never provide, and in doing so, one lives a life of authenticity, purpose, and dignity. Throughout the vanity of fame and wealth, Marcus Aurelius repeatedly urges reflection on the impermanence of worldly success and the superiority of internal excellence. He demonstrates that fame and wealth are illusory measures of worth, but the cultivation of virtue, the exercise of reason, and the alignment with nature and the rational order are timeless and accessible to every individual. The promise is a life of enduring value, one in which peace, moral integrity, and contentment are independent of circumstance, immune to fortune's vicissitudes, and rooted entirely in the conscious, disciplined governance of one's own mind and soul. In essence, this meditation calls the reader to shift perspective, to abandon the pursuit of hollow external rewards, to embrace the mastery of self, and to recognize that true wealth, recognition, and fulfillment are not gifts to be sought from the world but accomplishments of the soul itself, cultivated through reason, virtue, and deliberate living. Marcus Aurelius promises that by embracing this path, we attain a life that is resilient, meaningful, and free, an existence in which the fleeting allure of fame and wealth can no longer control or diminish us, and in which the only pursuit worth our time is the perfection of our own character and the conscious exercise of our moral and rational potential. Suffering, pain, and endurance. Imagine, for a moment, the inevitability of suffering, the quiet and persistent presence of pain in the human experience, the moments when life, with all its unpredictability, seems to test the limits of endurance, challenging not only the body but the mind, the spirit, and the very framework of one's inner life. And in this crucible, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, speaks with a voice that is at once commanding and compassionate, reminding us that suffering is not an aberration to be feared or avoided, but an integral part of the human condition, a force that can either crush the soul or, when approached with wisdom and reason, become a teacher, a catalyst for resilience, moral fortitude, and the disciplined cultivation of virtue. In suffering, pain, and endurance, Marcus lays bare a vision of human strength that is radical in its simplicity yet profound in its application. That while external circumstances cannot always be controlled, the judgment, perception, and response to them reside entirely within our power, and it is here, in the deliberate governance of the mind, that freedom, peace, and moral excellence are forged. The promise of this meditation is immense, that by mastering our inner faculties, by framing suffering as an opportunity rather than a threat, and by enduring with patience and reason, we achieve a life that is not merely bearable, but meaningful, purposeful, and ethically complete. Marcus begins with an assertion that is as sobering as it is liberating. Pain, loss, misfortune, and the trials imposed by life are unavoidable, yet the suffering they bring is optional, contingent not on the events themselves but on our judgment of them. He reminds us that humans possess a remarkable capacity to interpret experiences, to assign meaning, and to shape emotional responses, and it is through this power that we exercise control over what might otherwise appear overwhelming. The promise embedded here is profound. No matter the external force, no matter the intensity of the discomfort or the injustice endured, the individual who exercises reasoned judgment retains the capacity for serenity, resilience, and moral agency, effectively transforming adversity into a training ground for virtue. He emphasizes the necessity of endurance, not as blind submission or passive resignation, but as a courageous and rational confrontation with reality. Life is not a sequence of events to be wished away, but a series of moments to be met with equanimity, reflection, and action aligned with nature and reason. Marcus repeatedly urges the reader to recognize that suffering is temporary and often instructional, providing the opportunity to practice patience, temperance, courage, and wisdom, the very qualities that define human excellence. Here lies a central promise of the book. The trials of life, while unavoidable, need not diminish the spirit. Instead, they can refine it, strengthening character, clarifying purpose, and enhancing one's capacity for ethical and rational living. Marcus also addresses the human tendency to magnify pain through attachment, resentment, or despair. He observes that much of our suffering is self-inflicted, arising from the refusal to accept reality as it is, from clinging to desires that cannot be fulfilled, or from the projection of imagined injustices into the future. By redirecting focus from the uncontrollable to the controllable, our own choices, judgments, and ethical conduct, we reclaim agency, temper emotional volatility, and cultivate a mindset capable of meeting hardship without being dominated by it. The promise here is transformative. The mind, trained and disciplined, becomes a fortress, impervious to the chaos of circumstance, and every trial endured with reason becomes a step toward mastery over the self and alignment with nature. Throughout suffering, pain, and endurance, Aurelius repeatedly emphasizes the universality and inevitability of adversity, yet simultaneously offers a path to freedom. Accept what is unavoidable, act rightly within what is under your control, and allow reason to guide response rather than passion. In doing so, suffering ceases to be merely a source of misery and becomes, instead, a vehicle for moral growth, resilience, and inner peace. Marcus promises that by embracing this philosophy, we achieve a life of remarkable stability, one in which the trials of existence, rather than undermining us, contribute to the development of character, the cultivation of virtue, and the attainment of enduring fulfillment that no external circumstance can erode. In essence, suffering, pain, and endurance is a meditation on the human capacity to confront life's inevitable hardships with courage, reason, and ethical clarity. Marcus Aurelius promises a life in which adversity loses its power to dominate the mind, where endurance is not mere survival, but an active cultivation of virtue, and where every trial becomes an opportunity for self-mastery, inner freedom, and the fulfillment of human potential. By internalizing these teachings, the reader discovers that true resilience, peace, and moral excellence are not gifts of fortune but achievements of the disciplined and rational mind, a life in which suffering is not merely endured but transformed into a catalyst for enduring strength and ethical living. Daily discipline of the soul. Imagine waking each morning to the weight of existence, to the endless demands of life, the pull of distraction, the temptations of vanity, and the innumerable urgencies that threaten to scatter your attention. And yet, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, implores us to recognize that the most important conquest is not over others or over circumstance, but over ourselves, over the restless mind. Access a profound promise that the soul, disciplined and attentive, becomes impervious to the chaos of the external world, capable of enduring suffering, resisting vice, and achieving true freedom, fulfillment, and peace. Marcus begins with the recognition that the mind, left unchecked, is easily corrupted by fleeting pleasures, petty grievances, and the illusions of fame, wealth, or power, and that the human tendency to drift into thoughtless patterns of really a distraction, but a subtle form of self-imprisonment. He emphasizes that the soul's health, like the body's, requires training, vigilance, and intentionality. The big promise here is staggering. By exercising the faculties of reason and self-awareness daily, by bringing attention to one's thoughts and judgments as rigorously as a master trains an athlete or a soldier, one cultivates a mind that is coherent, disciplined, and aligned with virtue, a mind that cannot be undermined by fortune, envy, or the trivialities of life, and a soul that, through careful attention, becomes a sanctuary of calm and purpose amid the tumult of existence. Central to this practice is the act of reflection, the careful review of one's own behavior, thoughts, and intentions, undertaken without self-deception or indulgent rationalization. Marcus stresses that the disciplined soul is not merely outwardly virtuous but inwardly honest, constantly examining itself against the standards of reason, justice, courage, and temperance, and correcting course whenever deviation is detected. Here lies one of the book's most profound promises, that consistent introspection, carried out with courage and clarity, choices are deliberate, whose emotions are measured, and whose life embodies integrity, wisdom, and ethical coherence. Marcus further emphasizes the importance of beginning each day with intention, of framing one's mind to resist distraction, irritation, and indulgence, and of orienting actions toward what is within our control, our judgments, our efforts, and our alignment with nature. He insists that the soul must treat each moment as an opportunity to practice virtue, whether in work, in relationships, or in the quiet moments of thought, for every action, no matter how seemingly trivial, either strengthens or diminishes the disciplined mind. The promise of this daily attention is liberation, freedom from the tyranny of habit, impulsive desire, and unexamined emotion. A life in which the soul is sovereign, resilient, and steady, and a capacity to confront adversity, injustice, or misfortune with courage, equanimity, and rational clarity. He also reminds us that discipline is cumulative. The soul's health, like physical fitness, is achieved not in isolated acts but through regular, consistent practice. Small, deliberate actions, moments of reflection, choices guided by reason rather than impulse, the conscious rejection of vanity and triviality, compound over time, creating a character that is strong, virtuous, and resilient. Marcus' promise is transformative. By committing to this daily work, the individual gradually attains a life in which external events hold little sway over inner peace, where ethical living becomes effortless, and where the soul, fortified by discipline, achieves a form of invulnerability to misfortune, criticism, and the fleeting allure of worldly distraction. Throughout daily discipline of the soul, Marcus Aurelius presents a vision of life in which the cultivation of the inner self is the highest and most reliable pursuit, a life in which reason, virtue, and consistent self-mastery are both the method and the reward, and where the soul, through patient and deliberate practice, attains a serenity, clarity, and moral excellence that no external circumstance can diminish. The overarching promise of this meditation, and indeed of meditations as a whole, is that through attention, reflection, and the daily exercise of reasoned choice, one can live fully, ethically, and resiliently, achieving a freedom and peace that are entirely within one's control, a life in which the soul, disciplined and cultivated, shines with the quiet strength of wisdom, virtue, and enduring fulfillment. Conclusion. As we draw this journey through the timeless reflections of Marcus Aurelius to a close, it becomes abundantly clear that Meditations is far more than a collection of personal notes or philosophical musings. It is, in essence, a manual for the art of living, a carefully wrought guide for cultivating virtue, resilience, and serenity in a world that is at once beautiful, chaotic, and unpredictable. And throughout its pages, Aurelius extends a profound promise to every reader willing to engage with. His teachings, that no matter the circumstances of birth, station, or fortune, every individual possesses within themselves the capacity to achieve moral clarity, inner peace, and a life of purpose through the disciplined practice of reason, the cultivation of virtue, and the mastery of the self. From reflections on the shortness of life to the disciplined governance of the soul, from the recognition of human interconnectedness to the wise handling of insults, injustice, suffering, and the vanity of fame and wealth, Aurelius offers a vision in which the outer world, with all its uncertainty and impermanence, is no longer the arbiter of happiness or the source of moral worth, but rather the arena in which the disciplined and rational soul exercises its sovereignty, demonstrates its character, and realizes its highest potential. The central promise of Meditations is, in many ways, radical in its simplicity, that true freedom and fulfillment are not conferred by wealth, status, or the approval of others, but by conscious choice, ethical integrity, and the deliberate cultivation of reason and virtue. Marcus Aurelius urges the reader to recognize the boundaries of what is within their control, to surrender attachment to the uncontrollable, to endure suffering with patience, to respond to injustice without compromise of moral clarity, and to treat every day as an opportunity to exercise and strengthen the faculties that define human excellence: reason, courage, temperance, and justice. By internalizing this philosophy, one achieves a life in which external misfortune cannot dictate inner disturbance, in which fleeting pleasures and ephemeral acclaim no longer seduce or distract, and in which the mind, disciplined and aligned with nature, becomes an unshakable source of strength, clarity, and peace. The cumulative effect of this daily, reflective practice, as Aurelius demonstrates repeatedly, is nothing short of transformative: a soul fortified against chaos, a character capable of sustaining ethical and rational integrity, and a life imbued with a profound and enduring sense of purpose. Moreover, Aurelius' reflections are not merely theoretical. They are intensely practical, addressing the everyday challenges of human existence, from the irritations of trivial conflict to the vast inevitabilities of mortality and loss. Meditations teaches that philosophy is not a distant or abstract pursuit, but an active, lived practice, a set of exercises for the mind and soul, a framework for interpreting